Hey, welcome to my channel. My name's Christina Kent and I'm an artist based out of San Francisco. And today I wanted to talk with you about something that I've been kind of struggling with in my art career, and that is imposter syndrome. And it's interesting, when I first started posting my work, I didn't really feel much imposter syndrome. But more recently, as I've been experiencing more success in my career, I realized that it's starting to come up more and more often. So I wanted to do this video to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome, to show how it's come up in my own life, and to talk about what I'm trying to do to address these feelings. I hope that if you've experienced imposter syndrome as well, you could relate to this video and maybe find some tips that work for you. And just as a quick note, this video isn't sponsored by anyone, but if you want to support my work, you can purchase my paintings on my website, you can join my Patreon, or you can share this video with a friend. All of these things really help. So with that, let's get into imposter syndrome. So how's it been showing up in my career? As an emerging artist, I'm always looking for places to show my work, and I'm working on cultivating relationships with galleries so that I can get solo shows and more exposure to collectors in my area. And one of the things I've been doing, I've been working really closely with this one gallery, applying to all of their shows, and every time they have a show, they usually accept a few of my paintings. But then more recently, they actually invited me to a show where rather than having a large group of artists, they were only going to have 6 artists in the show, and they told me that I was one of them. This was an incredible opportunity, and it meant that they would be showing a lot more of my work than usual. So I knew that it was something that I really, really wanted to do. And I got really excited when I was invited to this show, and I started looking at the other painters they invited, and I realized that they'd invited a painter who I really admired. And now you might sit and think like, wow, this is a great thing. Like, I must have been so excited to have been invited to this show and to be in a show with another really, really good painter. But instead, all I could feel was fear. I was just thinking to myself, I'm in the show with her. When I saw the name of the artist who I really admired came up, all of these insecurities started coming to the front of my mind. I was thinking, her work is so much better than mine. How can I be in a show with her? It's gonna be embarrassing. I can't show my work with this other artist who's just so much better than I am. And I was having all of these negative thoughts, just thinking how scared I was to show my work in this environment, rather than being excited that I had been invited to show my work in this really exclusive show. This is a classic example of imposter syndrome at work. Imposter syndrome is when you have a lot of external success, but you don't internalize it, you don't accept it as your own. And so you're convinced that you got the success just because you were lucky, or that they made a mistake, and that at any moment they're gonna find out that actually you're an imposter and you're really not as good as they think you are. And these are the thoughts that were going through my head when I got invited to this show. I was thinking, oh, when my work is put up with this work of the artist that I really like, then people are going to compare my work to hers, and then they're going to realize that I'm really not a good painter after all. These feelings of imposter syndrome cropped up again for me when it came down to the opening of the show and another show that I'd been preparing for. So I had these 2 show openings coming up, and I've been preparing for these shows for months. I've been laboring for days and days on all the paintings for the shows, and I was really proud of the work that I had put into the shows. I put my heart and soul into all of these paintings and really brought my best work to these paintings. So the shows were coming up, and I decided to invite all my friends to the shows. And I sent out all these messages inviting everyone to the openings. And then as soon as I sent out all the messages, I had this feeling of fear creep up again. I thought to myself, oh no, what did you just do? Why did you invite all of these people to the shows? They're gonna come and they're gonna see that your paintings are really no good, and you're gonna fail on a massive scale. I mean, saying that now, it just sounds kind of ridiculous, just how cruel our thoughts can be sometimes. But that's really like the thought that cropped into my head at the time. And once again, it goes back to this imposter syndrome. I hadn't internalized the quality of my paintings, and I was worried that once people saw them, they were gonna realize that the paintings really weren't any good. This is despite the fact that I loved the paintings when I was working on them, and I'd even loved them just a week ago. It wasn't until I actually had sent out the invitations that I started feeling like an imposter. So these experiences got me thinking more about imposter syndrome, and it made me feel really motivated to figure out how I can address these feelings of imposter syndrome so that they don't prevent my success in the future. And I think it's really important to address the feelings of imposter syndrome early on. So Valerie Young has this book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, and in this book she talks a lot about, it's all about imposter syndrome. And she mentions that it is really important to address the feelings early on, or else it can prevent you from succeeding in the future. And that's because imposter syndrome works in kind of this tricky way. So you would think that if you had more success, that would kind of give you evidence to show that your work is really good, and that would reduce your feelings of imposter syndrome. But actually it works in the opposite direction. So because when you have imposter syndrome, you don't accept the external success as your own. You just think of, if you're successful, you think it's because you're lucky or because someone made a mistake or something like that. But you don't internalize it as something that you controlled, that you had power over. So each success you kind of write off as a mistake. And then as you become more successful, the stakes get higher and people's expectations get larger and larger for you. So if you feel like an imposter, your anxiety is only going to grow more and more as you experience more success. It's kind of paradoxical, and that's why I think it's really important to address these feelings head on before they get out of control. Because otherwise it can even lead to behaviors of self-sabotage. If you know the pressure is only going to increase as you have more success, and you don't know how you can replicate your success, then you're not going to actually try for success because you know it's just going to make your anxiety worse. So you might actually hold yourself back to prevent the increased pressure that success is going to bring. Versus if you know what you did to become successful, you're not afraid of future success because you know you can keep doing those things. You have it in your power to replicate your successes and to do greater and greater things. So in this way, I think one of the first important things about imposter syndrome is to recognize that you're having these feelings. I think if we don't recognize the feelings, then it's impossible to address them. And with something like imposter syndrome, we can feel a lot of shame around feeling like an imposter. Maybe we don't want to tell anyone. But if we keep hiding these feelings, then there's no way that we can actually move past them. And for me, it's been really helpful not only to recognize my own feelings, but also to read books about imposter syndrome or listen to podcasts, because then I realized that I'm not alone. It's not just me, but a lot of people feel imposter syndrome. And so that takes the shame away from these feelings. Another thing that's helped me with imposter syndrome is thinking about it in terms of the fixed and growth mindset. And here, I think that imposter syndrome is inherently tied to this idea of a fixed mindset. And if you haven't heard of this concept before, it was developed or at least popularized in a book by Carol Dweck, where she talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. The fixed mindset is the idea that we're born with these innate gifts and talents, and they don't change over time. Versus the growth mindset is the belief that we actually can build our skills, we can build our talents, and we can become better and better at things over time. We don't have these fixed traits, but instead they're changeable and we can grow. For people with the fixed mindset, if they're facing a test or if they're getting a criticism, then they really take it personally and they see it as reflecting on their value. And they take it really hard because if they get a negative criticism, because they see these traits as fixed, their own, say, artistic abilities or their intelligence, then if they get a negative review, there's nothing they can do about it. They can't get any better, and it's just kind of condemning them. Versus if you have a growth mindset and you get a bad criticism or you fail a test or you make a mistake or the project doesn't work out, then you can kind of take it in stride because you see the failures and the critiques as lessons, and you can you can incorporate those lessons and use them to improve and grow over time. And I think that imposter syndrome is inherently tied to this fixed mindset. It's this idea that we are an imposter, we are a fraud, and we can't get any better. So we just need to hide that from everyone, that we don't actually know what we're doing, because there's kind of no hope for us. Versus if we have a growth mindset, then if we try something and we fail, it's not that people found out that we're a fraud, it's that we learned a lesson and we can try again next time and we can improve our work over time. One thing that helps me when thinking about it is taking on this idea of a growth mindset. And when I'm feeling the feelings of imposter syndrome, just reminding myself that, oh, this means that I'm probably out of my comfort zone and that I'm in a growth area and I have this opportunity to learn and get better. And so in that way, I don't feel so anxious anymore, but instead I feel excited about the new opportunity. And that's another thing about imposter syndrome. I think that if we are pushing ourselves and we're going outside of our comfort zone and we're trying to do new things, then we're going to feel uncertain in it. We're going to feel like an imposter. If we've never done a gallery show or a museum show before, or if we've never painted a mural, or if we, all these new things that we're trying, of course we will feel a bit like an imposter because we've never done them before. But stepping into these areas outside of our comfort zone are essential to our growth. So for me, I'm trying to look at my imposter syndrome and see it as a good sign, a sign that I'm pushing my boundaries and I'm trying new things. I think the only way to never feel like an imposter is to always play small and not take on new challenges, and that's not where I want to be. Another thing that helps me when I'm feeling imposter syndrome is to look at my role models and learn about their lives, or even meet them if possible. Because once you learn more about the people that you idolize, then you start to realize that they're human, they're just like you, and they make mistakes and they fail. It destroys this idea of your idols being these perfect geniuses who make no mistakes. And then when you see that they make mistakes, then it gives you permission to make mistakes as well. One example of this for me was that I was taking a workshop with a painter that I really admired. And as he was going through his painting process, I was watching him paint, and I realized that the early stages of his painting, and I mean, I think that this guy is an amazing painter, but the early stage of his painting actually looked really kind of like not great. They looked awkward and funky. And he eventually was able to work it into a really beautiful painting, but it didn't start out that way. And that was really encouraging for me, because I had this idea that artists needed to make beautiful work from the very first brushstroke. I had this conception that it had to be beautiful from the start. And when I saw him work, I realized that's just not true. I think sometimes we can put these really high standards and expectations on ourselves that no one can live up to. And then of course, if we do that, of course we're gonna feel like imposters. Seeing a painter I really admired struggle with a painting from the beginning made me feel like it was okay if I struggle on my paintings too. And that was just a huge help for how I conceived of myself as an artist. Another thing that I'm trying to do to reduce my imposter syndrome, or at least to address the feelings that I have, is to look back at my successes and take ownership of them. And the idea here is that, of course, whenever you achieve something, there are factors that were outside of your control. In some ways, like, I think you do have to get lucky, but there were also a lot of things that you did, a lot of factors that were within your control that you made happen. And that is kind of the key to your success. And if you can take ownership of those and identify those, then you know that you can repeat your successes in the future if you keep doing those things. In the past, if I had a big success, like I sold a big painting or I got accepted into a show, I would kind of just brush it off. I would think, oh, maybe I just got lucky, or maybe they were feeling bad for me, or oh, maybe they made a mistake. Like, I would have these thoughts, which sound really harsh, but I think a lot of us have these same thoughts. Now, if I experience success, then I try to think, okay, what did I do that led me to be successful? What did I do? Maybe it wasn't everything, but maybe I did a few things that made big contributions to my success, like submitting my application in the first place, or reaching out to someone to help edit my application, or making the painting and finding the perfect venue for it. Like, all of these things are things within my control that I know that I can replicate for future successes. So these are the current strategies that I'm trying to use to address my feelings of imposter syndrome. And I definitely wouldn't say it's 100% successful. I'm still learning, I'm still trying new things, and I'm definitely still figuring this out. But I hope if you're feeling imposter syndrome as well, this video maybe gave you some ideas that you can try to incorporate, or at least made you feel a little less alone. And if you have any tips on what you like to do to combat imposter syndrome, I'd love to hear them in the comments. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, a big shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you all so much for supporting my work. If you like my art, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.